Montana Territory, July 1874. The sky was wide and bright as fire when they ran her out of town. Mara Deering's boots kicked up red dust as she stumbled down the main street of Dry Creek, her face flushed, hair half loose, and hands trembling against the heat. Folks turned their heads as she passed. Some whispered, some spat. The preacher's wife shouted something about sin, but Mara did not stop. She kept her eyes ahead, toward the edge of town, where the land opened up into tall grass and the low hills beyond. Her heart pounded like a drum in her ribs. Behind her, the sheriff's voice rang out, hard and final. "You come back, Mara, and it will be jail. Or worse." She did not answer him. She just kept walking. They had called it indecent, ungodly, loving a man who was already claimed by another even if that other had left him years before. They did not care that he was kind to her, that he had never raised a hand, that she had tried to keep it quiet. They only cared that it was not proper, that she was not proper. He had not stood up for her. He had not spoken a word when they threw her out. The sun was high by the time her legs gave out. She collapsed near a grove of cottonwoods, her skirts tugged by the wind, her cheeks streaked with tears and dust. She had nothing but a small bag of belongings, a few coins, and the ache of being unwanted. She did not know what she would do until she heard the sound of a horse slowing nearby. The hooves came to a stop. A man's voice followed. "Do not look like you picked a good place to fall apart." Mara looked up, blinking hard. The man was on a dun-colored horse, tall in the saddle, his hat tipped forward just enough to shade his eyes. He looked to be somewhere in his 30s. His jaw was rough with stubble, his shirt open at the throat, and there was a rifle strapped to his saddle. But it was his voice that caught her low, calm, and without judgment. "I did not mean to fall apart," she said. He nodded once, then dismounted. "I am not with the town," he said, tying his horse to a low branch. "Name is Callen Ridge." She watched him warily. "You going to take me back?" "No," he said, and stepped closer. "I own a spread west of here. Small place. Mostly cattle, some horses. You can stay a while, if you want." She stared at him. "Why would you offer that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you look like someone who needs a place. And because I do not like the way they treat women in that town." Mara's throat tightened. She did not know why she believed him, but she did. Maybe it was the steadiness in his voice. Maybe it was how he talked like he meant it. "I do not have anything to give," she said. "I did not ask for anything," Callen said. "You can ride with me or stay in this dirt. Your choice." She looked down at her hands. Then she stood. The ride to his land took most of the afternoon. It was rough country hills that rolled like waves, pine-shadowed gullies, and the far-off glint of water. He had an old place tucked against a rocky ridge, with barns that leaned and a porch that creaked underfoot. Callen showed her the spare room, said she could have it as long as she needed, left her clean water and a blanket, then went out to tend the horses. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floorboards. She had not cried when they shouted at her, not when they shoved her out. But sitting there, in a stranger's house, safe for the first time in days, she felt the weight of it all come crashing down. She wept into her hands, silently. That night, she helped him with supper beans and bread, nothing fancy, and they ate in silence. He did not ask her questions she was not ready to answer. He just nodded when she offered to wash the dishes. Afterward, he brought out a lantern and sat on the porch, whittling something with slow, sure strokes. She sat nearby, wrapped in the blanket, watching the stars blink overhead. "You always take in lost women?" she asked, her voice soft. "No," he said. "Just you." Something in her heart twisted at that. She did not know what it meant, but it stayed with her. Over the next few days, she helped around the ranch. She mended shirts, fed the chickens, and learned how to carry water from the well without spilling half of it. Callen was quiet, but not cold. He had a dry humor, and sometimes, when he thought she was not looking, he would glance over at her like he was trying to figure her out. One morning, while she hung clothes on the line, he came out with an old saddlebag and handed it to her. "Found this in the barn. Thought you might want it." Inside was a dress not new, but clean and soft, and a pair of gloves. She looked up at him, breath caught. "You did not have to do that." "I know," he said. She wore the dress that night. He noticed. She could tell by the way his eyes lingered a little longer, the way his lips parted like he wanted to say something and thought better of it. They sat close that evening, both of them quiet. The space between them hummed with something new. Something neither of them had words for yet. "Why did you leave town?" he asked finally. She looked down. "I loved the wrong man. He did not love me back the same way. Then he was not worth it." She looked at him. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. She swallowed. "You do not think I am, I think," Callen said, looking straight at her. "You deserve better than what they gave you." Her chest ached with how much she wanted to believe him. The next day, while they were fixing the fence out near the far pasture, a rider came. It was a young man from town, tense, dust-covered, and panicked. "It is the Dawson homestead," he said, breathless. "Fire broke out. There are 2 kids they are missing." Callen looked to Mara. "You know them?" "The Dawson girl, Flora. She has 2 little ones, Francis and Felix. I help look after them sometimes." Callen mounted up. Mara grabbed a rifle and a satchel of linens without asking. They rode hard. The Dawson place was half ash by the time they got there. Smoke hung low. The mother was sobbing, soot on her face, clutching her skirts. "They ran off. I told Francis to take Felix and run. I do not know where they went." Mara knelt. "How old are they now?" "Francis is 8. Felix just turned 5. Mara turned to Callen. "They would not go far. She is smart, but scared." They searched the woods behind the house. The sun dipped low. Mara called out softly, voice trembling. "Francis." "It is Mara. I am here." After what felt like hours, a small voice called back. "Mara." They found them huddled under a fallen tree, faces streaked with ash, eyes wide. Mara dropped to her knees and pulled them close, heart aching with relief. Callen carried Felix back. Mara held Francis tight to her side. That night, after the children were safe, after the fire had burned itself out, Callen and Mara stood under the stars again. "You did not hesitate," he said. "They are just kids. Someone had to go." He looked at her, quiet, steady. "I was right about you." She stepped closer. "About what?" "That you are worth it." She reached for his hand. He let her. They stood there in the dark, fingers laced, hearts open. And for the first time in a long while, Mara felt like she was not just surviving. She was beginning again. The heat broke 2 days later. A gray rain came in slow from the northwest, soft as breath on the skin. Mara stood under the eave of the barn, arms folded tight, watching the sky darken over the hills. The smell of wet dirt rose up around her, and something in her chest finally loosened. Callen was stringing new wire along the north fence. His coat darkened through at the shoulders. She brought him bread wrapped in cloth and a tin of beans, walking the slope with her skirts pulled high from the mud. He didn't stop working as she approached. "You ought to be eating something," she said, holding the bundle toward him. He took it without looking up. "I was waiting till the rain let up." She crouched near the post he was bracing and picked up the hammer he'd left in the grass. "Then you'll be waiting a long time." He glanced at her, one brow raised. "You planning to help?" "If I'm out here in the rain already, might as well be useful." A faint breath of a laugh stirred the edge of his mouth. He passed her a length of wire, and they worked without further word, her holding it taut while he nailed it down. By the time they finished the line and walked back, the rain had slowed to a mist, and the world glistened like it had been scrubbed clean. She brought her boots off at the door and left them on the porch. Inside, the stove warmed the walls, and Callen had already set a kettle on. He handed her a cup once it steamed, then leaned against the table, watching her. "You know," he said, "a lot of folks would have gone looking for another town. Start over somewhere far off." She met his eyes. "I didn't want another town. I wanted to stop needing one." He nodded, swallowing whatever words had come next. That evening, she stitched canvas patches over the knees of his work trousers by lantern light. He cleaned the rifle, oiling the barrel with quiet precision. The silence between them held shape neither strained nor empty, but like a field unplanted, waiting. "I've been thinking about building something off the east side of the barn," he said after a while. "A place to smoke meat. Feed holds longer that way. I've got some cedar stacked for it." She didn't look up from her sewing. "I know how to salt and pack. My uncle raised pigs in Arkansas. He taught me." His voice was low. "I could use help with that." Her needle stilled for a moment. "Then ask me." "All right. I'm asking." Outside, the wind moved through the grass. She tied off her thread and folded the trousers. "I'm not afraid of work," she said, standing. "But I won't stay where I'm not wanted." He set the rifle down slowly, then looked at her. "You're wanted here." She met his gaze, steady now. "Say it only if you mean it." "I mean it." She exhaled and crossed the room to put the trousers by the door. When she turned back, he was still watching her, but he didn't speak again. Neither did she. In the weeks that followed, they built the smokehouse together. He taught her how to split cedar so it wouldn't warp, and she showed him how to layer salt and ash for longer keeping. The work was slow, honest, and left their hands raw. She liked that how nothing pretended to be easy. One morning, while she was feeding the hens, a wagon pulled up beyond the corral. A woman climbed down thick-waisted, face lined by sun, eyes sharp with worry. She called out before stepping close. "I'm looking for Callen Ridge." He emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "You found him." She glanced toward Mara, then back to him. "I'm Clara Renshaw. My boy's been missing 2 days now. Took off after a row with his pa. We thought maybe he'd come through this way." Callen frowned. "What's his name?" "Eli. 17. Tall. Wears a hat with a feather in it like he's some kind of scout." Mara stepped forward. "I saw tracks near the gulch behind the ridge. Boot prints. Narrow, light stride. Could be a young man." Clara blinked. "You sure?" "I noticed them yesterday. Thought it was a drifter, but they looked fresh." Callen nodded once. "We'll ride out there now. If he's in the woods, he'll need food." Mara moved to the porch and reached for the saddlebag. She kept packed jerky, bread, bandages, matches. Callen caught her eye as he mounted. "You tracking? I'll find him." Clara watched them ride off, her hands wringing the edge of her shawl. The trail was faint, but Mara followed without hesitation. Broken stems, a disturbed patch of moss, the faint curve of a heel in soft earth. They rode in silence until the trees thickened and the sound of the creek grew louder. They found Eli at dusk, huddled beneath a rock ledge, shivering and pale. Callen crouched beside him. "You all right, son?" "I didn't mean to worry her," the boy muttered. "Just needed time." "You had it," Mara said, offering him bread. "Now come back." He looked at her, then at Callen, and something in his face eased. He stood slowly, his limbs stiff. On the ride back, Eli fell asleep against his mother's shoulder in the wagon. Clara drove with one hand and reached across to clasp Mara's. "Thank you," she said. Mara only nodded. That night, after the fire burned low and the chickens had roost, Callen found her by the corral, rubbing down one of the horses. "You didn't hesitate," he said. "Neither did you." He stepped closer. "You see things most don't." "I see what I've had to." The wind moved through the grass again, but this time, it didn't feel like something passing. It felt like something settling in. He reached for her hand, calloused against his. For a long moment, they just stood like that, the horse quiet beside them, the night warm with summer. "I want you here," he said again, softer now. She leaned into him, her voice no longer guarded. "Then I'll stay." A thin crust of frost clung to the grass the morning Mara brought in the last of the split cedar. Her fingers were stiff, sleeves damp at the cuffs, but she didn't stop until the stack was right. Callen was digging out the root cellar nearby, his breath visible as he worked. The cold had come early this year, September only halfway through, and already the air had teeth. He paused, leaning on his spade. "You handle the cold better than I figured." "I've lived farther north before," she said, brushing sawdust from her skirt. "Spent one winter outside of Bismarck with nothing but canvas walls and a stove that smoked more than it burned." He studied her a moment, then nodded toward the house. "There's coffee warming. Go on in. I'll finish this." She didn't argue. Her shoulders ached from the weight of the logs. Inside, the stove had caught well, and the scent of boiled chicory filled the room. She poured 2 cups, set one aside for him, and stood by the hearth, waiting for the feeling to return to her hands. By the time he came in, she had set bread and lard on the table. He took his seat across from her, dusting soil from his sleeves. "You ever think about going back east?" "Once," she said, "after my father passed. I still had cousins in Missouri, but I'd been gone too long. It didn't feel like mine anymore." He nodded, chewing slowly, thoughtful. "I've got cousins in Kansas," he said. "One of them writes every spring, asking if I've settled down yet." She looked up at that. "And have you?" He met her gaze and didn't look away. "Getting close." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. Instead, she stood and gathered the plates. That evening, a man arrived on horseback, his coat lined with coyote fur and his face worn from wind and years. He introduced himself as Elijah Gant, a trader from the Bitterroots, passing through on his way toward Fort Benton. He needed a place to bed down and offered dried apples in trade. Callen agreed without hesitation. Mara gave him the cot near the stove and brought out a clean quilt. Elijah ate hungrily, speaking in a low, rasping voice. Past a wagon turned over near Pine Hollow, he said. Young couple new to the land. Their mule spooked and snapped a leg. They're camped beside it, trying to make repairs. Callen looked up from his tin of stew. They need help. They didn't ask, Elijah said. But the woman's heavy with child, and they've no cover but canvas and timber scraps. Mara set down her bowl. How far from here? South slope of the hollow. Maybe 5 miles. Callen turned to her. We can leave in the morning. I'll pack what we've got, she said. They rode out before first light, the sky still bruised with stars. The wagon was easy to find, its wheel splintered, one side sunk deep in a rut. The mule lay nearby, breathing shallow, a tarp thrown over its side. The man stood as they approached, rifle held low but ready. He lowered it once he saw Callen's open hands. We brought food, Callen said, and tools. The woman sat wrapped in a shawl, her face pale, hands clutched to her stomach. Mara dismounted and went straight to her, kneeling on the frozen earth. How far along are you? The woman's voice was strained. Close. Maybe a week. Mara turned to Callen. We need to get her inside. There's no time to fix this wagon. He nodded. We'll double her up on my horse. You take their mule, if it can carry. They built a litter for the supplies and walked the animals back slow. Mara rode behind the woman, one arm around her to keep her upright. By midday, they reached the cabin. The woman's labor began that night. Mara sat with her through it, washing linens, steadying her breathing, whispering words that had once been whispered to her mother. Callen kept the fire fed and the children out of sight. The birth wasn't easy, but the baby came strong, a boy with a full head of dark hair and lungs loud enough to rattle the rafters. When it was done, Mara stepped outside, her apron soaked, hair stuck to her neck. Callen was sitting on the porch, watching the stars. She sank down beside him, exhausted. She's sleeping now, she said. So is the baby. He looked over gently. You did good. I just did what I knew. They sat in stillness, the only sound the wind tugging at the eaves. After a time, he spoke again. Last winter, I spent most nights alone in that house. Thought maybe I'd always be that way. She turned to him, her voice quiet. And now, he didn't answer right off. Just reached over, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Now the rooms don't echo so much. Her chest tightened. She took his hand, not for comfort, but because it felt right. Inside, the fire crackled low. The baby stirred in sleep. And outside, under the wide Montana sky, the cold began to soften, not from the weather, but from the warmth they had built, word by word, hand by hand. The first hard freeze settled in before the end of October, turning the creek to glass and snapping the last of the yellow leaves from the cottonwoods. Mara arose earlier now, lighting the kitchen stove before the sun had clawed its way over the ridge. She moved through the house with quiet purpose, blowing on her fingers between tasks, keeping the fire stoked, and laying out work clothes for drying near the hearth. Callen had gone into the southern meadow before light, tracking a cow that hadn't come in with the others the night before. She packed him biscuits wrapped in cloth and left them in the saddlebag before he rode out. He didn't say much as he passed her on the porch, only pressed his hand once to her lower back before swinging up into the saddle. That was enough. By midday, the clouds had thickened and the wind rolled in low and constant, carrying the scent of snow. Mara spent the afternoon sewing muslin liners for the windows and boiling down the marrow bones they'd saved. She didn't hum or speak aloud, just listened to the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional creak of the house adjusting to the cold. The knock came late, when the light had gone and Mara was stripping her hands in the wash basin. It was slow, deliberate, 3 taps spaced far apart. She set the towel down and stepped quietly to the door. A man stood there, older, with a beard gone white at the chin and a hat pulled low. He looked worn, but not mean, and his boots were clean enough to suggest he hadn't come from far. I'm looking for the Ridge place, he said, glancing past her into the house. You found it, she said. Callen's out on the land. The man nodded once, then shifted his weight. Name's Thad Ridge. I'm his brother. She held the door open. Come in, then. It's near freezing. He stepped inside, unbuttoning his coat. He smelled like horses and pipe smoke. His eyes took in the room slowly, resting on the stove, the tin cups on the table, the coat hooks she'd added by the door. You're the woman from Dry Creek, he said, not unkindly. She didn't answer at first. Then yes. He nodded, setting his gloves on the table. I heard about that. She looked at him steadily. You here to pass judgment, Mr. Ridge? He shook his head. I'm here to see my brother. She poured coffee, handed it to him, then sat across the table. Her hands were still raw from the cold water. He noticed. You've been here long? She wrapped her fingers around her own cup. Since July. He sipped the coffee, then leaned back. I came because I got a letter. Callen never writes. Figured it meant something. She didn't speak. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. He never brought a woman here before. I'm not here for decoration. I can see that. He set the cup down and tapped his fingers once against the table. What do you want from him? She didn't blink. Nothing he doesn't offer freely. Thad studied her, then nodded once, as if that answered something for him. The door opened not long after, and Callen stepped in, shoulders dusted in snow. He paused when he saw Thad, then hung his coat with slow hands. You got my letter. I did. They clasped forearms, brief but firm. No outward warmth, but no coldness either. Mara rose to ladle stew into a third bowl while the brothers sat. You find the cow? She asked. Callen nodded. Down in the hollow. She calved out early. Both are sound. She set the bowl before him, then took her place again. Thad looked between them. You've built something here. Callen didn't answer. He just picked up his spoon and ate. That night, Thad took the cot by the stove, and Mara and Callen lay in the room down the hall. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, but inside was warm. She lay on her side, watching the firelight flicker along the ceiling. Did you mean what you wrote him? She asked. I did. She reached for his hand under the quilt, lacing her fingers with his. What did you say? He turned his head toward her, voice low. That I wasn't alone anymore. That I'd found someone worth keeping. Her breath trembled, but she didn't cry. She only pressed her forehead to his shoulder and let the quiet say the rest. In the morning, Thad was gone before either of them stirred, his saddle prints disappearing west over the rise. On the table, he'd left a note weighed down with a silver coin. It read only, You were right. Mara folded the note and tucked it into the drawer beside the stove. She didn't ask Callen what it meant. That evening, when they sat beneath the lantern light, she pulled a folded scrap of muslin from her apron and rested it on the table. I made a list, she said. Callen looked up from the harness he was oiling. Of what? Everything we'll need for winter. If the baby stays till spring, they'll need wool. The couple doesn't have much more than cotton. He reached for the list and scanned it. We can go to the trading post next week. Take the sled. She hesitated. I'd like to buy fabric. Enough to make something proper. He gave her a long look, setting the harness aside. Something for you? She nodded. If I'm going to stay, I want a dress that fits the life I'm building. He stood and came around the table. His hands settled on the back of her neck, thumb brushing the hollow at the base of her skull. You think you need to prove something? No, she said. But I want to mark it. That I chose to be here. That I wasn't just taken in. He lowered his forehead to hers, breathing in slow. Then we'll get the fabric. And whatever else you want. Her voice came quiet. I want you. You have me. The wind outside had softened, the snow beginning to fall in slow, thick flakes. They stood there, the two of them, in a house no longer empty, in a life no longer waiting. The snow deepened in November, blanketing the ridge in silence. The post road to Fort Benton closed early, and the trading post near the Flotwillow became the only reliable place to barter and resupply. When Callen and Mara hitched the sled to the draft horse and headed out, the sky was low and the light thin, their breath trailing behind them like smoke. The trip took the better part of the day, the sled dragging heavy, overpacked snow. They arrived late afternoon, the post lit by lanterns and already crowded with trappers and ranch families. Inside, the air was thick with wool and tobacco, the smell of tallow candles and smoked meat hanging heavy. Mara kept close as Callen bartered for salt, lantern oil, and new boot soles. She picked through the bolts of fabric near the back wall, her fingers pausing on a length of slate blue calico, threaded through with tiny ivory flowers. The trader eyed her as she unfolded it across her arm. "That came out of Leavenworth," he said. "Fine weave. Bit dear." She didn't answer, only turned and crossed to where Callen was fitting new reins through his hands. "This one," she said, laying the bolt against his arm. He studied it, then met her eyes. "You sure?" "I am." He didn't hesitate. "We'll take the full yardage." They left with the sled full and the wind picking up behind them. The sky darkened faster than expected, and by the time they turned onto the ridge path, snow was falling again, slower now, but steady. The horse moved with care, hooves muffled in the hush. Mara tucked the fabric inside her coat, holding it close against the cold. "You ever miss it?" she asked after a long stretch of quiet. "What's that?" "Living nearer people. A town. Neighbors." He shook his head once. "Most folks I've known were louder than they were kind. I'd rather quiet and true." She looked forward again, the trees lining the trail like dark sentinels. "I used to think I couldn't be still," she said, "that I had to keep moving to keep from splintering. What changed?" "You." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he passed the reins to one hand and reached for hers beneath the blanket. "Thank you for staying." She rested her head against his shoulder, the sled rocking gently beneath them. It was enough. By mid-December, the calico had become a dress. She'd sewn it by lamplight, evenings spent with the needle and thread, the shape of it growing beneath her hands. She wore it on the day they rode out to the Dawson place, where Flora's children were waiting with pine boughs and a ribbon tied around a loaf of bread. Francis handed it to Mara with both hands. "Mama said you were the reason we're warm this winter." Mara knelt. "Your mama's strong. She just needed a little help to get through." Felix tugged at Callen's coat. "Can I come see your horses again?" "We'll bring you up come spring," Callen said. "You can help me break the new colt." The boy's eyes lit up. Francis clapped her hands. They stayed until the sun dipped low, then rode home through snow-dusted pasture, the sky flaring orange behind the hills. At the cabin, Callen built the fire higher, and Mara lit the lanterns one by one. The smell of cured meat and rye bread filled the house. It felt lived in now, settled. As they sat at the table, she reached into the drawer beside the hearth and pulled out the note Thad had left. She set it between them. "I've been thinking on this." He glanced at it, then back at her. "What part?" "The part where he said you were right." Callen leaned back slightly, his voice low. "I told him I'd found a home." She folded the note carefully. "I want to put roots down. Not just for the season. You already have. I mean it proper. I mean I want this to be mine, too." Callen stood then, crossed to the shelf above the hearth and pulled down a small velvet pouch. He opened it slowly, and inside was a plain gold ring, the edges worn, the shape simple. He held it out in his palm. "My mother wore this," he said. "She gave it to me before she passed. Told me to give it to the woman who'd stay through the winters." Mara stared down at it, her breath caught. "I didn't think I'd ever use it," he said. "But then you came here and didn't ask for anything but space to breathe. And now I don't want to breathe without you." She reached for the ring and slid it on her finger. It fit without effort. She looked up at him, her voice steady. "I'll stay through every winter." The wind brushed against the windows, but the fire inside was strong. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist, and for a long moment they didn't speak, didn't move, just stood in the quiet hum of a house that now belonged to both of them. They married by candlelight 3 days later, with Flora and her children as witnesses, and the ridgeland frozen under a deep white hush. The weeks that followed moved slow and sure. Mara mended the barn doors with her own nails. Callen built a cradle for the baby boy born in their care. They carved their names into the porch rail, side by side. When she laughed now, it filled the house. When he touched her face, it was with both hands, as if to be sure she was real. In the spring, the Dawson children came to visit, riding tandem with their mother on the pack mule. Francis helped plant seeds behind the house. Felix chased the chickens until they scattered in flurries of feathers. Later, Mara stood near the fence line, watching the grass rise green and full, her hand resting on the curve of her belly. Callen came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her middle, his chin settling on her shoulder. "You think the baby will take to ranch life?" She smiled. "We'll teach them." He kissed her temple, slow and sure. They stayed like that until the sun dipped low, the light gold and soft against the land they'd made theirs. And in that stillness, with the world turning green again, they knew they were home. Together. Always.